So let's start again. And I think everybody's here.
Yeah.
Benjamin, he doesn't really need teaching, so not something we care about. Yeah, so this is, I think there's a website called React Lifecycle. Yeah, this one. So you can give a specific version and they have a lot of languages.
Yeah.
So this should be here. So if we're on Slack. Okay. So constructor render component did mount. This is mounting, updating, render, did mount, and mounting component will end mount. Is it clear? Clear. So let's practice a bit of life cycle. So let's get this. I will create now a counter component like we did last time, but this time instead of we update the counter, it should be automatic. Every 1 second or something, it will update the counter. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
So you will go to.
Start recording.
I think I already did.
Yes.
So here I will create a component called new file counter. Or let's just bring it from to do. We had a counter. Did we?
Not here.
In the first week
In the first
we had counter. So let's take this counter. Let's import it. Import counter from first week / counter. Instead of rendering this, we will delete it and we say counter. Make sense? And we have our own counter. So now, instead of making this counter like this, we make it instead, it will increment every second. Make sense? So the way I do it is, I should not use a set timeout, I will use a set interval. Because I want to keep updating it every second. Remember that, set interval is for repeated. So I will have a set interval. But where should I put the set interval?
Did update.
Did mount.
Did mount.
Because when the component is on the screen, I want to keep incrementing. Not when the component updates. Is it clear? When the component is shown on the screen like here, it's here. I want to start ticking. Ding, ding. I start the counter. Make sense?
Yeah.
So I would say component did mount. Okay. And here I would say set interval.
Increment.
I'll just call this. Because we already created the method to increment. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
So we can say
1,000 every second.
every second. And it's doing the work. Make sense? It's clear why it's updating. So now we have one thing. If the component leaves the screen, okay. So let's build a component that show and hides components.
But if we have this component did update,
Yeah.
and if we update something else in the site,
What do you mean in the site?
on the site,
On the
website,
different component?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this did mount will
No,
still.
no. Did mount is reserved only for the component itself. If you update something outside, the life cycle inside the component doesn't have anything to do with that.
No.
So every component has its own life cycle. For example, the to-do app in the to-do list, every item has its own life cycle. So every component has its own life cycle. Make sense?
Yes.
So this is the idea. It's like state. Every component has its own state. So we are here. Let's go into first week and create here a new file. Let's create it hide.js. Okay, it's a class component. Call it hide, extends react.component. We say import react from react. Okay, render and we will now we will render null, but we will render something. Then we say export default hide. So here we import hide. We say hide, and we say hide instead of counter. And we import the counter here. Okay, and inside here we import the counter and we return it here. Does it make sense? We created the component. Itself, it will render the counter. Because they are both in the first week. Yeah. Does it make sense what we did?
Yeah.
We just create a component called hide. We render it here, and hide would just render counter. That's it. What?
We moved it from the index.
Yeah, it was rendered in the index. Now we put hide in the index, and hide will render counter.
Yeah, but why we need this?
Yes, I will write more code. Like, we will not keep it like this. We're not just creating empty component. It's like what? Hide 1, hide 2. Oh. So the role of this component is like it will have a toggle, so we can actually show and hide the counter. So I will put a state called show true. Okay, and I will say toggle show. And it will say this dot state,
That's fine.
set state, it will change the state, and we will say show is not this dot state dot show. Does it make sense? We set show to be the opposite of show. So true, false, true. It will keep like reversing it. Because not true is false and not false is true. Make sense? Yes, so we have this. We will here introduce a div. We'll put the counter. And we have a button. Okay. On click. This dot toggle show. And we say toggle. Make sense? You can just put this in. Like this. Is it clear? So now let's just check if our state is updating. If we say hide, toggle is toggling show and hide. True, false, true, false, true, false every time you click it.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yeah.
It doesn't have anything to do with the counter. But what we can do now is that here we say this dot state dot show, we show the counter, otherwise we show none. So we say, does it make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, but how can we make it, for example, it's counting 1, 2, 3, 4 and we toggle on 4, but it's still counting in behind.
So now what we need to do is that the counter now holds its own state. So we need to move the state from the counter outside
Yeah.
and putting it, for example, in the hide component. And the counter will only consume the state from the parent. It's like the list item. The item itself, it was consuming the state from the parent.
Yeah.
So if you want a component to disappear and appear again and preserve its own state, that means it should not hold its own state. You get the idea? So you should just move the counter outside and have the life cycle outside and just give it the value. So now let's do something more. You can see that React is warning us. Warning can't perform a React state update on an unmounted component. Why? Because in the counter, there is a set interval when the component will be disappeared. When we say toggle, it will be removed from the screen. But the set interval is already happening. You know what I mean? Because it never had, like, we never cleaned it up. Does it make sense? And you can visualize this by putting, you can put, for example, here, function, we can call increment, and also say console.log incrementing. Okay, so now if we toggle, it's shown incrementing. If we hide it, it's still incrementing. Why? Even that it's hidden. So there is an issue now with our app. There is a leak. And the way we fix it is by introducing the opposite of a component did mount. Component will end mount.
Okay.
And I call clear timeout. But I need to clear a specific ID of timeout.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For example, I need to say ID here, which is the ID of this. So we say ID equal.
Constant.
But this doesn't really work because they are in two separate methods. And when you declare a variable inside a function and the function goes, I cannot access this one. So what's the way how we can make the class, or we can make it class level instead of method level? Well, one way people used to say that a lot, we can put it in state. We can put the counter in state. And we say set state counter every time here. We can say set state ID, sorry. We can here say this dot set state ID.
Okay.
And get the ID from the state here. Does it make sense? We just put it in the state. So we get an ID. You know, all that set interval give us an ID.
Mm-hmm.
Is it clear that the set interval give us an ID?
Yeah, no.
Yeah, give us idea.
Yeah. So if you say set, if you set, for example, set timeout,
Yeah.
and you give it for 3 seconds, and you say console.log hello ID equal
100 what? Real timeout 100.
yeah. But if I would say clear timeout and then give it that ID that I got it from it,
Yeah.
I can stop it.
Yeah.
Does it make sense?
Yeah.
So technically I need the ID. So how I can get this ID from here to here? I can put it inside state. Just put it here. Well, I don't need to put it here, but I can just say this state here. And here we can say this dot state dot ID. Because I already stored the ID inside the state. Does this make sense?
Mm-hmm.
How we are storing the state inside the ID inside the state and getting it back?
No, not really.
Imagine that I will say 5 here.
But what you were putting it in state, and now you.
I can get it from state. The same way I can put the counter in state and I can get it from state.
Yeah, but first we don't have to declare it in state.
No.
As an
Because
ID.
no, not you can declare it. You can say ID 0, but that's optional. I only initialized counter to be 0 because I don't want to check here. Oh, is it the first time and counter is not defined, so I should make it 0. Else I
But
increment it.
what if we create this that set state counter, and we are not declaring state app? It will be automatic.
You need to do that. No, because you need to initialize state as an object. But what you put it inside, that's up to you. But state needs to be initialized. But you can put the concrete values inside here. That's up to you. I can, for example, not put counter here.
Yeah,
And when I try to do this, counter it will be 0. So I can say if state dot counter, if not state dot counter, counter equals 0. So I need to make if else because counter was never initialized. But because I initialize it, I don't need to do this check. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
So here I have I can get the ID from here and just put it here. Make sense? Does this make sense for all of you?
Yeah.
Yeah, because it sets the state, so now add updates.
It will just add ID to the object
The object, yeah.
and I can get it after. I can even console log it here. This dot state dot ID. First time it's undefined, after that it's 5. It's a random ID. So first time is undefined because it wasn't initialized here. But if I will say ID is 33, first time it will be 33.
Okay.
After that it will be 5 and 5 and 5. Because there's only one. We set it one time, not multiple times.
And why it's
Okay.
5?
Set timeout or clear interval, they give you a random ID.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
2 times 5?
It stays the same
It's-
Yeah.
it's-
because we do it once in component did mount.
Uh-huh.
We do it only once, and it gives us an ID and it will keep repeating the operation. You know what I mean? We're not setting set interval multiple times. We only set it once. Component did mount only runs
Yeah,
once.
but when you refresh,
Yeah, when you
Give you
refresh,
different.
yeah, it should give you different.
but it's not giving. It's 5.
Because we are not doing any operation. Because every time another part of your app does a set timeout, it give it an ID, and it will keep incrementing that. You know what I mean? This is like an internal working of a set timeout. But in our app, we only have one set interval. But for example, if you are loading multiple things and loading scripts and loading extensions, all of them, they have their own set time interval and they will fuck the ID, kind of.
Yeah.
Make sense? So we need to clear this ID and we are doing that. So now we don't have any incrementing anymore. But this is sort of half broken way of doing it. Why? Because do I really need the ID to be inside the state? The ID is never like, we said that we want to put stuff in the state so we can show them, like the counter or the list, but I'm never showing the ID.
But you're using it.
I'm using it, but I'm never showing it. What I mean is like my rendering, when I change the ID, my rendering doesn't really get updated because of the ID. My rendering is not dependent on the ID. My rendering is dependent on the counter. My rendering is dependent on the list items. But my rendering is not dependent on the what as you said, I'm changing it. Yes, but when I change it, I don't expect the UI to change. Do I? I don't. But when I change the counter, I expect the UI to change. So the counter should be in the state. But the ID, it should not be in the state. Because my UI doesn't depend on it. So we have another place where we can put stuff which is not related to React, which is the class properties. So if you have, for example, a class, test, if you have a class test, and you have a constructor, and you give it name, and you say Q microtask.
Classic.
And it's like wow, like VS Code used to do that. Now even the browser is doing that. Don't do this .name. Q microtask. Advanced stuff.
It's like background tab and then it info like
Exactly.
just some random JavaScript.
And it was only VS Code before. Now it's like everywhere. The disease is spreading everywhere. So we have this .name. And here we can say name. And it will say console.log. Hello. I'll do it the old way. Hello plus name. Plus this .name. Oh yeah, this is completely wrong. So when I say new test, I give it name is Yunus. I can save it in T. So I can say T.say hi. Say name. It's a simple class. Okay? It's simple. But you can see that where I'm setting in here, I can access it here.
In the map, yeah.
So when I put stuff on the this, I can access them all over the class.
Yeah.
Because it's related to the whole object, not to a specific method. It's not related to the scope of the method itself. It's related to the whole class.
Like it was putting in construction a JSON file and then we edit, delete or
Yeah.
code application.
Yeah.
By method.
Does it make sense? So this is the best candidate to store the ID. Instead of storing ID inside that, we can say this.id. So we put the ID inside the object because we will create objects of this class. The class help us create objects, multiple objects. So we can put it as a property, and here I can say this.id. Does it make sense? So whenever you have these like, I don't know, these values or this object or these primitives that you need them across your class, but at the same time you don't want to pollute your state. They are not needed for rendering. Being class property is a really good candidate for that.
And how can we see these class properties?
What do you mean?
What does this class contains? Which kind of properties?
It's the same way here. For example, you can see that when we did this one.
Yeah.
Well, stop pushing me down. This is annoying. So I will just open it in a new second. Nope. We want to do React. We don't want classes. No. We don't want classes. No. So if we create a class like this, if we say new test, Yunus, you can see that test has a name. So these properties are attached to the object that we create from a class. They're not attached to the class itself, but to the object that we create from the class. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
Just simple object-oriented, simple classes. Did that answer your question,
Yeah,
or?
yeah, somewhat. Yeah.
But this ID doesn't exist on the class itself. It exists on the object, which is the component. So if you render two
Yeah,
counters,
but I want to see, so counter component.
yeah,
It's a class.
yeah,
Which contains properties. Object with
yes.
properties.
And when
which properties does this counter class?
well,
contain?
until now we only have ID.
And how can we see which? Because sometimes
Well, you can
the
you
class
can just
be huge. So we want
you
to
can
use,
you can do like what I did. You can just do console.log, and you say print this.
Yeah.
You can just print this. So you can print this in the render. And you can see now it has like increment because it's so annoying. I will just stop this. I will just stop this. You can see I printed the class. There's a lot of things. But most important thing, we have an increment because we have a method called increment. we have a state, which is counter and ID. And if I would put here this dot name equal something, I will get it here. So it exists on the object when the component will be created, on the this, because the this refers to the object.
Okay.
If we use this dot ID, we go back to the data.
Yeah.
Do we still need to add the ID to the state?
No need for that. This is enough.
After this, still has the one.
Yeah, but the one who uses this dot ID, that would be
Make sense? It is a bit confusing.
It's a lot.
What?
I think it's a lot. But
Yeah, it's a lot of detail, but this is the
Yeah.
abstraction.
Yeah.
Now we are not trying to build code, we are trying to build thoughts.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We are trying to build thoughts, not code, because code doesn't really matter at the end. The thought, how you like architecture it and build it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That's why
Yeah.
this React is different.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's not about like, because you can do all this stuff like
Yesterday
this.
I was training to create a button, and then increment it and stuff
Decrement,
like that,
yeah.
just get an input, get the value, and I was saying to myself, oh my god.
Oh yeah, we will cover input. We will cover inputs next week.
Yeah.
Okay, inputs are a bit different in React. You will see that next week.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of stuff that you don't really like kind of give them attention now, and for you it's like, why I'm using this stupid thing? It's like I can just do it much simpler
Yeah.
within JavaScript React. But it's really about the architecture and it's about building real products. It's not about just doing stuff. So companies, they have, for example, Facebook, they have 20,000 components. So imagine like not having component and all this code base glued together. You're like, it will be impossible. It will be a mess to change something. But now Facebook, they can put Messenger, they can delete stuff, they can close things because they are just components. Like now, I wanted to close the toggle or the counter. Imagine that the counter is a super huge component, like a feed. I can still like manipulate it the same way I manipulated counter, because it's just a component. So this is like really the good abstraction, that you can abstract all components.
But if the counter is part of a bigger code, it's going to be difficult to isolate it if we're not using components.
Yeah, exactly. If you're not using components, you will not have boundaries.
Yeah.
You will not have clear boundaries. But React defines boundaries for you. So you need to respect boundaries. It will be so difficult to break the boundaries with React. But within your own code, you can break the boundaries easily. So a framework is just a way to help you build things. It doesn't really it doesn't add more things to you. A browser is just a browser. React doesn't make you do extra things. It's just the same thing that you need to do, but in a specific framework-ish way, organized way. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's difficult, like sometimes like we're putting curly braces and
Yeah,
just
yeah.
that is confusing.
syntax is
That is
we have to
a lot
learn that,
confusing.
like copying some videos, like just doing
Sure.
it, then it's easy, but if we are doing something by like from scratch and we are thinking on it, then
And it's always one error.
yeah.
React child object. So it's not showing you where to go, what to do, Change it and solve it. It's one error.
Yeah. So this example contains lifecycle, contains state. It doesn't only contain props. So let's introduce props in this. So instead of counting from 0, I want to start counting from a number that the consumer of the component gives to me. So in hide, I would say initial counter. It's like the initial counter. I would say it's 5, let's say.
This is the property.
So I want to start initial counter with 5. Where to put it? The first thing, where I'm initializing the counter.
In class, props.
Yes, so I will go here, I will say this dot props
Okay.
dot initial counter. So the counter itself will not start from 0, it will start from a value
It has been in the
that it's passed from. So you can see here.
Why we are not directly
Accessing
passing in state, like
What do you mean?
2 plus 5.
5.
You mean like put 5 here?
Yeah.
That means that if I will put 5 here, if you want to change it here 6, you will not be able to do that.
Then we change it.
You need to go inside the component, and this is the worst thing that you can do. You want to make components,
Yeah.
black boxes.
Yeah.
You don't want to, for example, like in case, like in my
Complicated.
company at least, we have like thousands of components. If every time I want to use a component, I need to go and read its code, that would be a nightmare. But most of the time, we have a list of components, and this is what for example, we have a component called PDF, and this component takes a link and render a PDF inside the page. A component for rendering PDF. It's doing like so many things inside to render small PDF and pages and stuff. But I don't care. I want to render a PDF. I import PDF renderer. I give it a URL. It renders the PDF for me, and it's done. Same thing if I want to render a navbar. I give it an array of items, home, about, and stuff,
And then you
and
get
it will render the navbar with me. I don't need to understand how the navbar is rendering it. No need, because the component should be contained
Yeah.
function.
entity or function. Like functions, you should never go inside function and change them. You should just parameterize them. So this is the idea why we don't do that. It's a bit difficult, but now if 2 or 3 people start using a component, they can use it wherever they like.
Okay.
It will be more flexible. It's like a function that add a plus b, and a plus b are defined inside the function. It's like no one can use it. It's just that add 1 plus 2, 1 plus 2.
Yeah.
But if you a and b, if they are parameters, everybody can use it to do addition. Does it make sense?
I think it will also be easier because we're passing it in as props. Something else might also render that initial state.
Yeah, we can render it. We can render it 2 times, or someone else in the app you can render it.
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
Okay.
For example, in Facebook, you have the chat list, like your friends. Sometimes you disable it. I do that a lot. I disabled it. I'm not a bad person, but I just disable it. So I don't talk with anyone. So you can see that it's the same chat, but it's just kind of gray.
Yeah.
So the way you understand is like there is a chat component and it accepts a prop called disabled or enabled.
Okay.
And if you click disabled, we only give it a boolean called disabled, and it will change its own styling.
Yeah.
You don't need to understand, if you work at Facebook, if you are a Facebook engineer, you don't need to understand how it's gray and doing stuff. You want to disable it, you give it props. If you want to render a list of users, you give it a list of users. It doesn't matter how it's doing that. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
So this is like some useful cases of component did mount, will unmount, stuff like that. And of course, as I said, the sky is the limit. Like, the more you build, the more you discover new ideas. You will never be able to say, "Oh, I'm done." It's always like something to discover. But do you have more questions?
Maybe after homework.
Okay, so
What is this week homework?
This week homework? Putting the checkbox and you will see it. It's disaster.
We'll update
We have
this
to just,
and we'll add, remove, delete.
It's already put in the create week 2. Yeah.
it's going up the counter. It's consuming battery. Incrementing all the time. Google. If you want to, for example, create a button to reset the counter, what you will do?
What?
If you want to create a button that resets the counter, for example, makes it 0, or makes it as the initial props, how will you do that?
We can use the same logic. We just toggle the button.
You can like,
Component will unknown.
no, not necessarily. So this will be a good exercise for you now. So yeah, I think you already have the Create React app from last time. Feel free to create a new one, or use the same one from last time. Up to you. People who weren't here last time, they can create a new project. I can help with that. And basically, you will extend this example. So forget about hide and everything. You will just create a counter that auto increment like this, but with additional buttons, so you can decrement and increment manually. Or you can even extend it more. So just to formulate the task, so you will add more buttons. One button is to stop the timer and start the timer again. So we will add the pause button. Make sense? A button, you click it, pause the timer, you click it again, it starts the timer back. So it's toggle.
Yeah.
Make sense? So you will do that. And you will create another button called decrement if you want to decrement manually. So -1. Is it clear?
Yeah.
Not clear how to do it, clear what I'm saying. It should not be clear how to do it. You need to figure it out. Like, I'm not. Does it make sense? What I'm saying? Cool. So
Divide that from the beginning, or do you wanna
what?
divide all this from the beginning?
I think it's fine. You can use this code.
Can you
Yeah.
can
Can
you
you
post
post
now? Post.
Well, I want you to write it, but just clean it a bit. Yeah, I think it's fine. So one button to stop the timer and start the timer again, and another button. I said decrement. You can also use with another button to reset, make it 0 as you like. But yeah, one mandatory button, which is like stop the timer, run the timer again.
And maybe start with like making the counter or the button, just stop it, and when that works, then you can work on like starting the timer again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's also
So
good.
you're not doing too many things at the same time.
Yeah.
When we get a coffee.
Just do it a bit fast because you will have 25 minutes or 20 minutes to do the exercise.
What people studies want you to do is
We need to have only this code, right?
Yeah.
we need to do it, put it in our to-do list. Not putting it into. Index.js because this
Last week photo or this to do?
Depends what you want. Module.
What will when it came? The button came. I'm getting this one. Yes.
Not the number. Go change the state to 0.
But that is one, right?
0. Not this props.
We have to make another button to
Yeah.
stop this
Yeah.
counting.
But we have to create a method for stopping.
No, I had that problem. Like the time I updated was not the time updated because that
Too bad. Counter and
yeah. Okay.
How it's going?
Tough.
Tough.
First thing, as he said, try to create a button that stops the timer.
yeah. The timer.
So you click. So first thing at all, create a button.
Yeah.
Just create a button.
When that button is clicked, log out something.
Yes,
Then
like I did like updating first. Remember, it was empty. The method that adds to do, it was empty. Just updating, and after that we kept like filling it. So my example, take it, put in your code, create a new button. So this is just returning one button. Makes it into a div or a fragment as you like, and put multiple buttons, and one button called stop timer or toggle timer. And when you click that button, you say console.log or something.
And remember, yeah, we can't pass two elements like that. It has to be one element that then contains two buttons. It could be a div, yeah.
Yeah, I was taking different.
Yes. How many of you have got the Prettier installed?
Me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, nice. Because it just helps a lot. I feel like.
Remember? It got better.
Now pause time.
No, I'm not using this system. Only this one.
You get the idea about the class, and it's a component, and we have also you get the idea about state, or it's a bit confusing. Okay, so state is just so you can see here that when we render,
Like, hit the stop.
we render this dot state dot
You're stopping?
Counter.
Function error.
Remember, you can't
Counter.
return two elements.
What does it mean?
You have to return one element.
State is just a placeholder.
So you can either wrap the two buttons instead, and what you normally do is you wrap it in a React.fragment,
Yeah.
because that will just go away.
Set it to
Okay,
zero.
so we should put it like this.
Clear time.
If I want to, so the counter is 0 initially.
Exactly.
If I want to update the counter, what should I do? I need to change the value of the counter. Okay?
Yeah.
Means like I incremented by 1, decremented by 1, يعني ناقص 1 زائد 1. فشو راح أعمل؟ راح أحط function اسمها increment.
This way.
Exactly.
والفانكشن دي شو راح تعمل؟ راح تعمل set state. شو الرول بتاع set state؟ simply set state بتروح على الستيت بتاع الكومبوننتس بتاعنا وبتعمل عليها modification. فهلا احنا بناخد الكاونتر وبنعمل الكورنت كاونتر، الكاونتر القديم يعني، وبنعمل له باسورد وبنحطه في ال so the way you should think about it is like
It's only stopping.
Yeah, that's good. Good start.
But now I want when I press to.
Yes. So what should we then do?
راح اعمل variable الكورنت كاونتر وراح احط post current counter.
Should I write a method about pause?
What, sorry?
A method for pause
لما
time?
لما اليوزر بيعمل على البطن
Yeah, but
Yeah,
when
you
I
can do
stop
that.
it, it
But,
clears.
but you need some function that knows
لما
should I
اليوزر
start or
يعمل
should I
click على
pause,
البطن.
right?
Yeah.
There needs to be some functionality that kind of checks, is it
it
stopped now? Because if it's stopped, I need to start it.
clear until now?
Yeah.
If it's already running, then I need to stop it. How should we
every
say
time you
that?
click the button because you're saying on click
We give segment,
on the button.
but
Yes.
We have to fire this. And what's this?
Where
It's
should we
this
save
method.
this information?
And
Exactly. Yes. What could we call
this
that?
method, it will take the counter, current counter from the state, the counter that we put here initially,
The counter is not showing values.
and it will say set state. Means I want to set the state.
What's our
as a higher than the state.
Yeah, I would call it
تعرف
something
الفكرة؟
like,
عايز أغير
I don't
الستيت.
know, timer to
عايز أغير الستيت
Something
وأخلي
like that. We can check
الكاونتر
like
والكاونتر ده
if timer's running,
الكاونتر القديم
then
زائد واحد. فهلا كل مرة راح أعمل كليك على البطن راح أغير الستيت وأخليها بلس 1. الفكرة إنه set state لما بنعمل set state الفاليو
so now you should like
الأوبجكت
you call stop timer down
كمان
here. You
رجع
have
راح يعمل
two
ري
functions here.
راح يعمل
Stop
render
timer
again.
and pause timer.
في الكاونتر في الأول
Calling
واحد
this
كان
stop
zero.
timer is a little bit
كان زيرو
Yeah, it's
عملنا
clear,
كليك
But sorry?
غيرنا
it
لواحد
clears the interval.
عشان عملنا set
I
state
cannot,
Yeah,
if I
but
start it,
I
it will
can
start
render
from
again.
zero.
yes. So
So
right now
how
it's
do we
good.
measure
But once we start implementing the stop
Yeah,
slash
but then
pause,
what-
then we should call this function something else.
So this is
Because
the
it'll
idea of
confuse you.
state.
If the name is stop
يعني
timer,
إحنا بنستعمل state
it should be
عشان
stop or
عدد
start
value.
timer.
لما
I would call
بنغيرها
it. Does that
عشان
make
نغير
sense?
اليو اي
Yeah.
عايزين
Or
نغير
yeah,
الفانكشن.
that, or you can add some functionality here that checks,
Yeah,
you know, if the state start timer, if
State
it is
should,
not running,
and
stop
then
timer. You
six.
can also do that. That's actually
غير
just as
الأوبجكت
good.
بتاعي
Sorry.
ورياكت اوتوماتيكلي راح يعمل ري رندرنج
Should I rename
راح
this?
يغير الانترفيس
Start or
راح يغير الوجه.
No, I think it's a good idea
عشان
actually
يخليه
to maybe do
يبدأ
like
بالvalue.
stop timer, start
شو
timer. But then you just
لأن
need to
الكاونتر
check
زيرو
down
هنا،
here.
هلا مع واحد
Yes.
لأنه عملنا set state.
Yes.
Check this, yeah?
Exactly. And do that with
في
a
كومبوننت
ternary.
ضد
Do
في
you
لايف
like
سايكل
that?
حكينا عن اللايف سايكل انه يعني في بعد الكومبوننت لما تكون سكرين ولا بعد
I'm just
ما
running.
تروح بسكرين
How do we access this one?
كومبوننت زي ما
Yes,
is a life cycle
created this. Then
مثل يعني نقطة في الحياة
Yeah.
شو بتعمل؟
Yes. And then a ternary, you know that? Exactly.
ياك بتعمل رن الفانكشن دي اوتوماتيكلي لا احنا ما بنعمل رن الفانكشن
Exactly.
Stop timer else?
رياكت اوتوماتيكلي
If it is running, then we stop it. If it's not, then we
بعد ما الكومبوننت تاعنا تروح على اليو اي لما الكومبوننت
This is the implement, yeah?
No, then we want to start the timer. I think that was what Jonas said.
اوكي and here شو راح
So
نعمل؟
once
راح نعمل
we stop
stop
it,
interval
Or
No. If
لما
the
راح نعمل
timer is
شو
running,
راح نعمل فيه؟ راح نقول
then we stop it.
yeah.
repeat
Else,
كل
we should start
ثانية
it.
كل ثانية
So
نعمل
we should make a
Repeat
function
issue.
called
Repeat the function D.
Start timer.
Start timer بس start timer from zero.
الفانكشن دي شو تعمل؟
I
تعمل
just stopped it.
Now I know from the
تعمل
counter that
call
they
the
saw.
same
Both
method.
between one day.
From this.
بس هلا كل ثانية بنعمل increment، كل ثانية بنعمل increment، كل ثانية بنعمل increment. Because before كنا بنعمل increment manually. هلا بنعمل increment automatically. كل
We
ثانية.
get the states. These are states.
Does that make sense? Yeah, صعبة.
I would rename the text of
مش
this.
الكود صعب بس الفكرة صعبة.
I think it's a little confusing
بس
that
أنت تشوف
they are all have the same.
set interval تعطينا ID. ديروا set interval تعطينا ID.
So like call this one
في
stop
مرات
timer.
راح
Increment
نكررها
timer.
5 مرات
It's
6
just
مرات.
the
بس بعدين عايز
literal text.
اعملها هاي. I want to
You
stop
don't need to
counter.
do that in Java.
شو بعمل؟
Okay. This one.
بعمل clear time. وانا حاطط
Now
ID في
you're-
this.
This means you're running
فلما اعمل
Java.
clear time هو بيعمل repeat تعمل repeat.
I have stopped the timing, but I don't know how to start it.
دي الفكرة.
The,
وانا فين اعمل
It's just- I just clear the time out.
مرتين هون.
I just
لما
click
كنت
another
عايز
button
أروح
and I just wrote stop timer
راح اعمل
and
stop
then I
the
just
time.
clear the
لو
interval.
مش عايز اعمل updates
So you just stop the timer.
عايز اعمل updates بس للcomponents دي.
Can you?
Does it make sense? Yeah, الفكرة شوية
stop.
خطة بس.
Mm.
بس دي يعني ده ثاني اسبوع.
How do you do decrement?
في عندنا لسه 3 اسابيع.
Decrement.
So I just
الفكرة صعبة.
stop the timer. So it stops here.
Okay, great. Yes.
Now,
بس المشكلة إنه لازم.
Now next step. So what is it we want to do now?
Why is it going to be one?
What is it that should happen next time we click the button?
حاولي هلا بدك تعملي button.
there should be we should get the state.
button ثاني.
If we're talking just UI,
بيعمل stop.
what should happen when I stop?
هلا
It
إحنا
stops.
بنعمل
You've
stop
done
the
that.
counter.
What should happen next time I click it?
Start the timer.
عايزين نعمل stop the counter
We
manually.
want to start the timer.
زي ما هلا بنعمل
Stop.
click ونعمل file.
Like, shall we make another button or?
عايز button ثاني نعمل
Both
file.
are same. It is
تعمل لي
okay.
clear time.
No, it should be the same button.
Mhm.
Kind
So
of.
start and stop.
فاهم الفكرة صعب شوي يعني.
We have to implement
How?
the toggle.
For you,
Exactly.
it's
We have to implement some kind of functionality that is conceptually is like,
Stop it.
is it running now or is it stopped?
Okay.
The counter.
And how should we save that? How can we get that information? Where can we save that information? Yes, we need to write a function for that. But where do we save that data?
Sorry.
Those dates.
Exactly. We save the top data in state. Yeah. So in the state there should be some kind of
a state,
like
timer is
key
running,
that
true.
says like,
and then I'm saying here.
is the timer
that
running
state,
or
the
is it
timer
stopped?
running. Stop timer
And then the
or
function
start
should
timer.
stay
Now
like,
this
if the timer is running
counting,
and we
I
click
stop.
the button,
But
then it
it's
should
not.
stop.
Okay.
If it
Maybe
is
I
not
have done
running,
the mistake
then we
in
want to
this.
start it. Exactly.
First thing console.log did the condition that you are.
You understand the concept now. But
Yeah,
what
how
it
to
is.
do it. It's about practicing.
We kind of like.
It's about practicing.
Oh God.
I remember exactly 3 years ago when I wanted to learn React and I landed on the page and that was the same page like blue React. It's like, what's this?
Yeah.
What this means? So it's about practicing. Everybody passes by literally the same thing that you are trying to do now.
Okay.
Literally.
We just have to break it down to small chunks. In a concept function.
True.
So true, rendering, true, rendering, true,
The
rendering.
function
It's only decreasing by one. I don't know why.
Why everybody's using the English?
Within the
Here only.
within the class.
So incrementing true, if I would say stop,
After stopping, I'm just clicking for decrement. So it is going only one
it's stopping.
minus
Mhm.
one.
Okay?
And what happens?
It's stopping,
when we
but
click
it's not
again?
rendering.
Again.
I
Yeah.
don't know.
So technically, when you say, so this is
Again, oh.
true, timer is running.
I think that's
So
how it's
we
supposed
use
to be.
stop timer and stop timer is doing this.
Yeah.
Okay, but what you should do, you should also update this. So you should also say this.
Hi, I want
Set
to
state.
make him decrease by himself.
What's sorry?
I want to decrease it.
You should
Not
also
on
say
the
set
tree,
sake.
Mhm.
like how it is.
Update the
increasing.
timer is running to be false.
Because
Can I repeat
It's
it?
going
Sorry,
automatically.
I just
Set
mixed
timer.
Arabic with English.
When I
now.
stop,
Damn it! Damn it! I was talking with her in Arabic. Sorry. Yeah, it's. You need to.
I think the way Jonas meant it is like this, where you're digging around by clicking, not by the.
I have
Should
to
we write
set
it?
state.
No, you don't need to set the counter.
one now.
But you need to
But what
update
you
your
do is-
this
Which is boolean.
because you are
Yeah.
never changing timers
And
when.
increment is running.
Like
then
this.
the
You
boolean
get the
is
idea?
true.
Because when you stop the
Stop
timer, you
now.
need to make it stop.
Yeah, it stops.
So I
Now
have
the
to
next
timer
thing
will
should be
change false.
the-
Exactly. So you can stop the
Yeah,
timer.
like, okay, start the set timer to put like
False.
Exactly.
And here it will be
Yes.
false, and
And
then it
how,
will
how
start
can you
timer.
Besides-
say that
Right, in here.
you know that you know
Yeah.
it should either do one thing
Yeah,
or
it's
do
done.
another
True.
thing?
Okay.
When you click the button.
What
What is it we need to do then?
Yeah.
This is not set. It's not.
We use the boolean to
Yeah,
toggle the
yeah.
states.
It's called this, not set.
Yeah, you set the
Exactly.
boolean.
We need to do anything
boolean
else.
here,
But
yeah,
But where
yeah.
should we save that data?
Sets.
Put it in there.
If something
We have
else
to- on the
something,
stage,
where
we
should
have
we
to put
save that
boolean,
data?
And then where to use it here.
Instead,
In first in the
exactly.
increment.
We
First
want
in
to
the
save that data in state.
What he did.
We want to like kind of check something like
No, but that's good. That's good stuff.
the
So
time
stop
is
timer.
running and we click the button.
Start
Then we
timer
wanna
should not
stop the
set
timer.
counter plus one.
If it
Start
is
timer
not
should
running,
start
then
the
we
timer.
click the
We're not
timer.
starting the timer.
Then it
Yes.
should start the timer.
This that.
So we want to save
This
that
that
kind of
component
function
mount.
of that
Yeah.
data.
So
in
you need to
state.
abstract this. So this,
Or
let's. I will just help
want
you.
to
with
save
this.
it in state. Yeah.
I'll just say
What do you call that? We can call it
Toggle.
Yeah,
start.
yeah, when this that start timer, we call
So
it
you can
start
say
timer. Yeah.
state
Start
show
timer.
true.
Okay, not equal to digital state like show.
Just create a reference.
So counter
So it's like in the state we have to put
So now we have a function. So we need to call it in the component bit mount first.
And then toggle
Because
every
we need to
time
increment
like if increment is running like then it toggle to like if it's true then it's a false.
Exactly. But it's not a.
And here we
No.
remove
When
start
is
timer
it?
because
We
start
should
timer
toggle
doesn't increment the
the
start timer
function
starts
state.
the timer. I don't know
When
why
should
I'm
that happen?
putting.
When we click the
When
button.
we click the button,
button.
when we click the button, we toggle the state.
Yeah.
Yes,
Now?
exactly.
So it should be part of the object.
Yeah.
Yeah, we
Now-
can put it here.
so
When we start
start
the-
timer needs to do two things.
Stopping the timer. So then we can change this.
Change the
Yeah.
Change the state.
Okay.
So let's say start timer.
So if I was
Okay.
you, I would start with literally just like when you click the button, just log out, you know, the toggle state and see if it should say like true, false, true, false, true, false.
Okay.
Get that working first,
And
and
we
then
say-
you can start with all
This
the
one.
all the timer
Okay.
with like stopping and starting the timer.
This dot start
Timer.
In the simple in
timer, and we say timer is running true again. So we keep flipping it.
Yeah.
So the initial
Stop it.
toggle. And what do we need?
It just needs some sort of tweaking. Like you just need to be like, oh, what does it mean to stop the timer?
First console log.
Oh, I need to update time is running to false and clear the interval. What does it mean to start the
Yeah,
timer again? It means timer is running, we keep it true, and we run the interval.
This function.
It's like it needs this kind of thought
And this
mixing.
one, yeah.
No,
Yeah.
in this
Here.
one.
But that is good. You were doing like
Zero change.
really good. So
Zero change.
And can we also delete this?
What should be the state? What should be the state of that toggle version? True or false? We should show it. True, yeah.
So you have to put it toggle.
But behind, when we clear the interval,
yeah.
this stays 8. But it starts from 0 when we start it again.
As you like, you can do that. Up to you. I
How
said
can,
like
we, how can we pause the set interval?
so the same way. So you want when you want to stop the interval, you want to make it 0. This is what you
No,
want.
no. I want to pause it. If it is 8, let it be 8. But when I start it again, start 9, 10, 11, not from 0.
It's not starting from 0.
Yeah, but here in
So it's 11. It's 12. It's not starting from 0.
yeah, but from behind it's clearing interval. Clear timeout.
Oh, clear.
Yeah.
It doesn't clear the timer. It doesn't clear the counter. It clears the interval. And it's not timeout. It's
Yeah, it's,
clear interval. So this one is not making the counter 0. This one is only stopping this.
but when we start this again,
Yeah.
it will start from
To start from what you've stopped from.
yeah.
You can see here. It's 14, 15, 16. You stop. You start again. 17, 18. Because you are never. If you wanted to be 0 when you start the timer again, you can do this. Start timer again. You can do this, or you can just put it here. Count, because you can put 2 is an option. You can say
No matter if we
yeah. It doesn't matter. Just know. So you can now start or stop. Start from 0.
yeah, but stop and start, and then I will do clear. Button.
You just need to think about that. Clear is not clearing the counter. It's clearing the timer.
Starting from 0.
No, now it's starting from 0 because we are setting it.
Yeah, but I want this to be pause. If it is pause on 3, start 4, 5, and there another button, reset.
Okay. Yeah, but
So then we have to change the set state to 0 count. This one.
so it was like this. It was
Yeah.
it was like this. You can see here like 1, 2, 3. I stop it.
Yeah.
If I start again, it will start from what?
Yeah. From 3.
3.
Yeah. But now I want.
You want another button that resets it to 0.
Yeah.
Any
Reset. And then we are doing.
No, it's not showing.
So what happens now when you click it? We want to log out the state.
Counter
Yeah,
0
I just
and
try to
You don't need to change the timer is
put
running
this,
because you
this
just
one
want to
here.
set.
and,
You want to reset the counter, not the timer. If the counter is running,
Yes, so run me
and you
through that
reset it to
code.
0, you want to keep the counter running.
You
Yeah.
clearly
You don't want to
interval.
change the counter.
yeah, it's true. Yeah,
So
yeah.
you
Run
want
me
to
through
change
like
it.
what happens here.
here I have cleared this the interval
Okay.
that we have started here.
Yes.
So it and then
No, you don't need to do anything. You don't need to start the timer
I
because
need
the
to
timer
change
was
this
already happening.
from false to true.
You
Yes.
get the idea?
How do we do that?
Yeah, let it try.
How do we change the state in React?
This to this term. State dot toggle.
No. How is it we
Yeah,
set
it's
the state?
now-
Let me
now
ask you
it's
one
Oh,
more
sorry.
question.
Yeah.
This dot set state.
It's just about like breaking the thought.
Yeah.
It's like how you contain
This
instance.
dot
Is it mine?
Cheers. Yeah.
Thank you a lot. Cheers.
dot toggle.
No. Look at how the state has been set.
Oh
other
yeah, okay.
places.
This dot set state.
And what is it we give to set state?
We need to change the value of this one.
Yes.
And we put this way
Exactly.
toggle
Yes.
and we
So it's-
put it
30 seconds.
True.
We pause
True. Yeah.
on 30.
But-
Then we start.
Okay. Let's try that.
Or we pause again. We reset. And we start. No, I'm not doing it.
And then
But
what
if
is
you
what
want
do
to
you
do
do
it
on the last
different,
line?
it's
Then you log
same.
out this dot
Just
toggle.
we decrement timer and this does set state. We
this
do
dot
counter. This does state that counts -1.
this dot state dot
And then you go
Exactly. Yes. Let's see what that does.
Yeah, he has done here. Started off.
Yeah.
What time?
True
False.
false. Yeah.
Let's
I
try and
declare-
click again.
I declare here counter 0 and timer is running
True. Let's click again.
And then I'm saying if the
True.
timer is true, then stop the
Okay.
timer.
So why is it
Else,
true all the time?
Start the timer again.
Because it's changed. We have already changed it here from true.
Yeah, but we want to go with true, false, true, false.
Okay.
But why are we all the time showing true?
Because like we have already hard coded it true.
Exactly.
here, so that's why it's
We've hard coded it true.
yeah.
But we want it to be the opposite of what the
What
toggle is right now.
Okay.
How do we
Don't
do
give
that?
up. Don't give up. Keep trying. Don't give up.
So if you have like this, I've got
If
the-
no-
I've got the states and I've got this my
Exactly.
Okay.
there.
We just take the opposite of what state is right now, right? And we just say if it's true, then it should be false. If it's false, then it should be true.
Makes sense.
Okay.
We're on the same page.
So I put that there and then here. So I have
Exactly.
that. So
And then
this
this dot
has the toggle
toggle.
and I'm trying to figure out how to do that bit here.
No. Now you want to use this.
If we toggle the button,
Where you can use this.
then we should
No,
You use this inline to the button. You're saying that if true,
Remember the difference
If you
from
invert the concept.
just accessing properties on the class, then you just do this dot something,
yeah. So
like with the ID.
use that,
But when you need to get something from the state, you need to do this dot
That's
state
and you're
dot
saying that.
something. Yes,
Why you did it? What you did.
exactly. Now let's try and log it out.
That's okay, as
But the idea now, so you are like
Is that
50%
that's
why?
timer?
Because now you are maintaining a state if a toggle is running or not. But more than that, what you need to do is that, so when you make it true or false, so
This is true.
exactly.
So you're
So now we
saying
need to
if
decide that
this is true.
So we have a state.
Okay, so something happens in the beginning that's a little weird, but
At least
we can probably figure out what
Boolean.
the problem with
Which
that
we
is.
declare as set
Okay,
time.
you're
But,
using one button.
um,
That's so in this button. So in counter toggle,
Yeah.
So here you are saying
You
about
reverse
this number, so
You
you want
reverse
the
it.
counter
Okay,
from
now
the
we
state to
reverse
be
the
displayed.
No, but why it shows for the two times it shows false.
Yeah.
If,
So
If it's
as an
running.
attribute
Okay.
to the button, we
that's
are
it,
doing
that's,
the logic.
if this
You know.
does state.
the
you can
counting
pass
just
as
if it's
property.
counting
Showing
Yeah.
this
means
go up.
just a second. If it's counting means it was not counting before
There you
and
just
it's counting
counting.
now.
No, yeah, okay.
If it's not
Nothing
counting,
Then two
means
times
it was counting before and it's
Yeah.
not
So
counting
if you
now.
want,
So you
go
will
to the
do
button.
if else
This is
based
the
on that.
timer
Yeah.
state.
And if you use you
True.
say if it's
So we
counting,
are saying question mark, yeah.
you will
And then
clear the
when
timer.
there's start,
I think we have
Stop.
to
Yeah.
put as a
If it's
property,
counting,
you
then
start
pass
and
as a
make it
property.
false.
because it wasn't
Make it
counting
false.
before.
How?
Okay.
And if
What
it's not
if I do
counting, means
type
it was
of
counting before,
this
so you
dot
clear the
state
timer.
dot toggle? What will
Does
it
it make sense?
return?
question mark.
Yeah.
Cool.
And you're saying
A string.
It's just about thinking.
But what are we saving
You
there?
get that by
Is that-
practicing. It's not the
Exactly.
Boolean.
You say true false.
Yeah.
To me, that doesn't sound like a string. It sounds like a
No,
boolean.
To remove that quotes and.
So we don't need the
double
quotes.
quote this, yeah, yeah.
What is a better name for toggle?
About this?
Toggle
that-
could mean a billion different
Yeah.
things, right? What do you think a better name for toggle
Is
is?
that, so if you change this, so let's say it was false, you change it to true.
What does it actually mean? Like what is the meaning of that state? What is it actually keeping track of?
Yeah, so it's better if you use that.
Of time.
Yeah, and you should say.
Yeah, something with the timer.
Yeah.
And what is it keeping track of with the timer?
Start, stop at the time.
Exactly. Yes.
Timer,
And you have to.
Timer toggle is better because now we're timing it to the toggle.
Or if
So now I can do counting the states.
Yeah.
And then do
I would call it something like
Yeah.
is timer running
is timer, okay.
because that is literally what it means.
Yeah,
okay.
we are very bad at
But you don't need to really.
No, that's
what-
fine.
what do you
Uh,
do now? If you can just explain line of code.
Okay,
Yes.
what I want to do is, I want to check this.
Because then it'll also like when you log it out, it'll say
Go ahead.
if the timer's running, and you can actually see if it's running. So it like matches up a bit more with what we
I think you would
expect.
do the difference, because
But now we need
we
to
need
change.
a code.
Do you? Can I show you something?
It's fine, it's fine.
I thought I can get it with just one line.
It's fine.
See here, you can do like this.
I always do that.
Mark it
I
and
try
then
to do
say
one line and
Control
just-
D,
Okay, yeah.
and I mark the toggle. The toggle.
I think
Okay, and
this
if there were more, I would
Yeah.
add more. And now we can say is
And then all
timer
the
running.
Okay, so yeah.
So we don't need to like fix them individually.
we want to.
It's very helpful. I use that a lot.
Yeah.
Control
we set
D.
these states to count. Then we want
So
to
Okay, so
start-
now I
Why?
think it should be working as we expect it to.
One
So that's what we need to.
I think if you run the second case, just keep the first if. Just say
This
else.
one, this.
Because I think that case it's a
Fast.
bit tricky. So just cover the second trick, which is
Okay.
stopping the time.
Yeah.
And you can go into
Now we
the,
need to write some code that if the timer's running, we need to stop it. Else,
So now
if
we
it's
want
not running,
time.
then we need to
You have
start it.
this.
Okay?
Normal.
And
And
to
that
really
is
stop the time,
Yeah.
we say how we are already
No,
stopping the timer
no,
once
no, so it-
Okay.
in our app. Where? We're
Yeah.
stopping the timer once, if you remember.
you stop. Now
We are
you stop.
stopping.
Yeah.
We don't need to write a function
But it's
again.
not
We can
stop.
write it
Why?
again.
Because when you stop,
Yeah. Like we should remove
So
this
we are
timer
already
thing
clearing it.
from here.
Okay,
Just
so,
need to
you stop.
write the timer.
Call that.
yeah,
So
what we
we
have to
just
do
say-
now, you know?
Write JavaScript
Change the
function.
status.
Yes. Yeah, the status should be now.
Zero.
So this will stop the timer.
Yeah.
So let's
And then
try.
you're saying if it is false, then
Look,
stop.
we have cleared the timer
Go,
here.
go
Yeah.
there to the code.
Well, it doesn't really.
So
So
over here,
we should.
Like
give
see,
them-
here we will get the value
Use that.
of
Set
status timer
status.
running or something like.
no,
So it's like
no, these that
we
set
can
state,
directly
set status,
after this we can
Yeah,
directly
set
say
state.
if
Yeah.
a state
parentheses.
this one this
Curly
dot
braces. Parentheses,
if
curly
timer
braces.
running like is
How do you change?
then do
step
this
state?
else
No,
do this.
Yeah.
you change.
So-
Yeah,
But
parentheses,
we need to
this.
remove then.
and then
we-
inside here you have an
Like
object.
this timer
You
is
should
running
use that.
like it's
You see?
0 1 2 3
Okay.
Oh, shit, it's
and the then function is like clear intervals
Mhm.
this dot id
So false.
Else.
Go inside there, curly braces.
True. True.
increment maybe we can call this
Yeah.
Else we
make
can
a-
start it again, yeah.
Oh,
So
I don't know what happened now.
Timer status.
Nothing. It's
We
clear.
are missing out on this.
Yeah.
So
it's a touch screen.
Yeah, it's
If
just-
this,
Leave it. So, like first, shall we put this one in the if else conditions, or it should remain here? This clear interval we are clearing it.
It's in the like
Stop.
this timer running like it's a then true.
Start.
So
wait this one.
clear
There.
interval
Let's see. We can write it if. Yeah.
in the bracket.
Yes.
Yes, what if we stop it?
And now this dot state
Yeah, but you have to make start.
dot
That's the
is
status.
Make-
timer
yeah, yeah.
So probably we can say.
timer.
So now we have this
Sometimes I
increment.
don't have that issue.
Now,
It
You
is.
can put it in
Yes, I
not
know.
I think so.
So now if we do
no,
this,
no, what now? One more.
Curly
we stop the
braces.
timer.
Yes.
So we now we need to put the logic.
Yeah,
of
but
starting
then we
the
have to
timer
write
again.
something here. Okay, this is
So,
true.
Which is
Yes.
running the timer, running the set interval in it.
Make
Then clear
a new
it.
method.
Just
where
comment
you
it out
say-
here.
But we don't have
And then
a
you put this inside.
guys. We don't have more time.
And then you say
Let's try to.
start timer.
Because it's then
And
true.
then you will have
Right?
You see?
Guys,
Yes.
Start timer.
let's try and correct it together.
Depend on your what value you are writing here.
Yeah.
Here
Okay.
to the start.
Let's try and- Let's try and correct it together.
Else.
Please, if you can follow me, it's more important. So we said that we will create a different button here. So I'll just rub this in a div. Put this here. I will duplicate this button. Okay. And I would say here toggle timer. Why there's semicolons everywhere? Okay. So when I toggle item, it's just incrementing it now. So the way I will do it is that I will say here toggle timer. Toggle timer. It's equal to this. Make sense? So now the way I will do it is more like most of you, they used state to keep track if it's stopping or not. Let's go with that approach. So let's say counter, or let's say is running. I always like to use like is with or has with booleans.
Is thus.
Yeah. So is running. I would say true. because initially it's running. And here we will say this dot set state is running to not is
Not.
running, which is this dot state dot. Okay, so here instead of printing rendering, I'll print this dot state dot is running. First step. I'll just remove incrementing. I'll stop it. False, 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 false. True, true. False, true, true. Make sense?
Yeah.
So in toggle timer, as we said, we can just do it here because we cannot do it after it. Because after it, we are not guaranteed that the value changed after it. But in this function, we are guaranteed that it's changed. Make sense?
Yeah.
So I will console.log here the timer instead. So it's true, true, true. Yeah, I'll just delete this. It's never running. I say false now. True. False.
Yeah.
True. So just to kind of build an idea, when I click it to stop it, it's false. Okay? So what I'm gonna do is I would say if it's not running, I will stop it.
Yeah.
Because it was running and now it's not running anymore. So I would say clear interval this.id. And if I would refresh, running, 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 stop it, it stops. Make sense?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Somehow? Now I have the else.
Start.
Starting. What does starting means? Means doing this again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I will make this a function.
Oh, we cannot use component did mount.
Oh no, because component, it's like calling render. These are conventions between you and React to do things. Component did mount means like you cannot just like today is my birthday. You cannot just do that.
Why
You
not?
can
It's
you cannot just like say no, it's 10th of something. Like you cannot just. So it's like a convention between you and React. So if you will call it manually, that means that it's not guaranteed that it's running after the did mount. It needs to be always after the mount. So say start timer. I always do this. And it makes a lot of errors. Make sense?
Yeah.
So now we can say start timer. Will this work? Oh yeah, because I never called it again. So we need to call it the first time. So it should be running.
Yeah.
We can stop it. We can run it again. Does it make sense? The way that we introduce another piece of state to describe the operation or to describe exactly what I am in. And based on that update, when we make it true or false, we execute either we stop the timer or we run the timer again.
Yeah.
But the like the state, I guess, could also be saved on the function. No, on the class. Sorry, right? It's running.
True.
Instead of saving
True.
the
It could be. This is also another idea that this dot state is running. It's not really needed for the state. So what he's saying we can do that is that the first thing I'm gonna just as timer, I would say timer helper, just a random function. It's like timer
Helper.
helper. Sorry for the name. I think it's yeah. This is just to abstract it, and it will be like a bit better code. So we will do this. So what Benjamin was saying is that instead of using this.state.running, or instead of putting it inside the state, because we don't really need it to update, we can do this. So here we don't have a set state anymore. We just call this, and we say this dot is running equal not this dot is running. And we initialize is running. Instead of here with true, we just put it here.
Outside this
Yeah,
box.
it's like CSS.
It's like this dot state. It's like this dot state. This will be put in the constructor as this dot is running. Remember that?
Yeah.
All these will be like this dot is running true. It will be initialized
And
like
it
that.
Always will be that. Yeah.
Yes. So here we can say this dot is running is thing, and here instead of checking, so I think I can just copy this code here. We don't need this helper anymore
I
because
think this is running is equal with this is not running.
what?
It should be after this start timer. Or?
Just a second.
Yeah, it's-
If dot is running, will that work? It does. What did you retain from this? What we changed is that not everything should go into state, which is quite important. Because you are not really needing is running anywhere in the render. Your pixels doesn't depend on is render. It depends on the counter, but it doesn't depend on is running.
But if you want to use if else statement in the button,
Now I can just put it
Then-
inside the yeah. If you are doing that like you, yes.
then we have to change the state. We can.
Yeah, we need to change. We need to change in case of that because our render depends on that. But I like to keep everything in method smaller, and like so your render will be smaller. Make sense?
Yeah.
Any questions? So remember, as you can see, it's not really difficult code. It's just like really simple if else and stuff. But it's more about the thought,
Yeah.
how you approach the problem.
Logic.
It's the logic, as you said, and the abstraction. And the way you get that is by practicing a lot.
But like do like me and Jonas, sit with this problem, like break it into small
Yeah.
little problem. Like to begin with, literally just make a button that you can click and it locks something out. Then no, not even that, just lock anything out. Then when you have that, then you can start with the true false. Then you can start making the if else. Then you can, and then when you have the code, you can start doing like Jonas did here, calling them nice function names like start timer, stop timer, toggle timer, all these kind of things. But like do it step at a time, small little tiny steps at a time.
True.
All the time checking that it's working. Because if you do too much at the same time, then you don't know where the error is, and you will struggle kind of debugging your code.
You'll spend twice time trying to find the error,
Yes,
then really like going slower.
Yeah. So really try and think about breaking it down into
Exactly.
the tiniest problem.
And this is not because you are a beginner or because you are
No,
learning.
no.
This is like I don't like in computer science there is something called divide and conquer.
Yeah.
So it's like even the toppest mind that solve problems, they divide problems. For example, if you want to sort an array, they divide the array into two arrays and the arrays into two arrays. So even the greatest minds in history, they use this technique because the minds cannot keep up with the details. Too much details in the mind blocks it. So break your problem, makes them smaller and chunks, and you have progress instead of being stuck. So this is it. I will post the homework in the channel, so no need to wait for that.
Okay.
Cool.
Can you just press this one as well?
I will push it.
Yeah, that's right.
No, that you have to see the video and then get it.
Yeah, but sometimes, sometimes
like
it's
the video
physical thing is
do
better.
it.
Sometimes video is like 3 hours, so it's better that just get
Yeah.
this one.
Thank you for today.
Welcome.